we just grabbed a couple, tools, and we didn't know what we were going to need. We just went walking in, and it was just, and as I know you recall as well as I do, it was just like you went from the gorgeous blue sky into Armageddon. I mean, it was just like a blizzard, but it was all of course, ash and smoke and everything else.
What's up, guys? Today I am in Washington Heights, 190th Street, uptown, running around the city a bit, but continuing to bring you special replay episodes that commemorate the 25th anniversary of 9/11. As I pass kind of a iconic New York City bodega and a fantastic New York City neighborhood, we reflect on how this city, Washington, D.C., Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and the world were forever changed by the events of those days. And the stories remain. We're going to keep bringing them to you. I hope you appreciate it here in Rob Sarah's story, here in Lila's Nordstrom story. We're going to continue to bring you other powerful stories of leaders, first responders, advocates who met the moment on that day 25 years ago and continue to meet it now. I continue to show these episodes because I think they show unity, they show resilience, they show how fast time flies, but shows that we can get through even the toughest of things if we're together, if we're unified. That's what the real message in 9/11 is all about. That's what the spirit of this city, this country, and I hope the future will be all about. So I hope you're getting some time off. I'm also celebrating my son's 11th birthday this week, so that will cause me to adjust my schedule, but I'm going to keep bringing you light to contrast the heat, challenging the status quo, and helping us all never forget those fateful days around 9/11. And most of all, especially now, as we get into these dog days of summer and football's almost here, stay vigilant. Out here from New York, stay vigilant.
Joining me today is a good friend and colleague, the one, Richard Naviasky. Rich is a retired FDNY firefighter, recently retired, and recently moved across the country, which we'll get to. But yeah, I'm not going to waste any time. I want to introduce everyone to Rich because I'm excited for you to meet him. Rich, welcome.
Thank you very much. Not too many people get excited to meet me, so I appreciate that.
Well, it's usually after they meet you that they're not very
That's
excited.
true. They get excited to meet me, and then they wish they hadn't pretty soon after.
So Rich and I are a bit of kindred spirits, right? Both English majors.
Yeah, yeah.
Both stumbled our way into the FDNY. Rich,
Both hilarious.
both hilarious. Rich is a graduate of the University of Delaware. Is that correct?
I would say that that's not true. I
Oh.
attempted to be a graduate of the University of Delaware, but the drugs and alcohol kind of shortened that for me. So I wound up graduating from UMBC, University of Maryland, Baltimore County.
Oh, all right. All right. Joe Flacco did not attend that school, though, did he?
Nah, he didn't. He didn't. But when it comes to Joe Flacco, I am a blue hen all the way.
So, how does one make their way from Maryland to the mean streets of the West Village? Tell us how you got into the FDNY in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I consider myself one of those accidental firemen. A lot of people come to New York, and in the fire department, we get called OSWs, out of state workers, and but they've had this plan. They grew up loving the fire. The idea of the fire department. They always wanted to be a fireman. That was definitely not me. I had no idea I was going to be a fireman. So I was just working in Baltimore. As you said, I was a English major and took that degree and went straight to working in boat yards and with a carpenter for a few years and things like that. Nothing at all to do with English, but except that we spoke English. But then a friend of mine called me up and one day, and she was like, "Hey, Rich," a friend from high school. She's like, "Hey, Rich, why don't you come up to New York? I got this this job. I'm working as a production manager on a newspapers. They put out like weekly newspapers, and we need somebody to help lay out pages." and I got a roommate moved out of my apartment and this and that and the other. And I was like, yeah, why not? I'll move to New York. That seems like a cool thing to do. I was, again, like I said, I was working in a boatyard. It wasn't like I wanted to make a entire life out of that. So I was like, yeah, I'll go to New York, and that's how I wound up there. And then I was there, and I started thinking, man, sooner or later I got to figure out something to do with my life before I turn, I mean, anyway, I was pushing my late 20s at that point, so I
Did you
said,
still have the mullet? Was the mullet still working or no?
now, unfortunately, I was already starting to grow this,
Oh.
I think so. The mullet was only going to be a skullet at that point. Although I wish I could get it back. Um,
Hell yeah, brother.
but so, anyways, I wound up. I wonder how you become a fireman. I looked into it, and it was like they were giving the test, and so I just figured, oh, okay, that's cool. They give the test every couple months. I'll take it this time, And as we know, they really don't give the test that frequently. It's every 4 years at best, and so, timing is everything. I've got a sort of a Forrest Gump quality sometimes of getting through, my stages of life.
Right, right. So, I'm assuming we took the same test, which was what, 99?
Yeah. Yep.
99. Okay. So you did well, presumably you got to the top of the list,
Yeah.
like I did. So you got on in February of 2001, right?
Yep.
So a few
Correct.
months before me.
Yep.
So you got on, you went into the academy, and where'd you go right after that? You went on the first
So
rotation?
yeah. So just like you, so me and Rob and one other class. There was three classes. We had this thing they called it the 14-week program, and so we went to the academy for 10 weeks, and then my class was the only one that did it the way it was intended, because then 9/11 kind of screwed everything up as far as the world, but also as far as scheduling of the
Right,
academy. I went 10 weeks to the academy, then I went for 14 weeks, so 7 weeks in an engine and 7 weeks in a truck. And when I did that, I was in Brooklyn, in the Avenue U Watchdogs in Gravesend, Brooklyn, which was a great house. I had a really,
I
really
didn't know
great,
that. All right.
yeah, yeah. So I had a really great experience there, really great introduction to the job. The guys there were fantastic. I mean, they were all about teaching and laughing and having a good time, and I had my first fires there and everything. And then I went back to the academy for 3 weeks, which was weird because they didn't know what to do with us, because now we had already been in the field for 3 months.
Right.
And then after that, I got assigned to engine 292 in Woodside, which is the engine that shares quarters with Rescue 4. And so that was sort of my I guess my unintentional road into SOC. So that I don't I guess I'm allowed to use names, but Steve
Sure.
Mikowitz, was who very well, was a fireman at that point in Rescue 4, got promoted, went to Squad 18, and called me up and said, "Hey, Richie, why don't you come over?" And that was the road that I took to get to the West Village. So with
Right.
2 years on the job, which is, and same with you, like, and all the guys that were coming into SOC at that time had very little time on the job. In current times, you don't go to SOC with that little bit of time on.
Sure.
But in our time, and me and Rob's time, it was they just had so many holes to fill between the, tremendous number of guys that died in SOC, as well as guys that got out through medical reasons, and also just through having had too much over the course of the period after 9/11 and stuff like that. There was just a tremendous number of openings at that time. So lo and behold, me and Rob together wound up saving the world from the West Village out.
This episode of Independent Americans is sponsored by Kalshi. We make predictions every single day. We talk about it on this show: politics, pop culture, the economy, the biggest stories making headlines all across America and around the world. Kalshi, America's #1 prediction market platform, lets you trade those predictions in a live market. If you haven't checked it out, now is the time, especially around politics and the elections. Will Trump buy at least part of Greenland? If you think he'll do that before 2027 and you wager $100, it'll pay out $2,019.24. If you think it's going to be before January 20th, 2029, it's 17%. You can also pick whether or not you think the Republicans or the Democrats are going to win Congress. You can pick who you think the Democratic nominee will be, who the Republican nominee. It would be great to see if there's an independent nominee. There's a lot that you can wager on, but on Kalshi, you're trading against peers in a live market, meaning there's no house. And as the probability changes, you can buy in and out of your position. It's fun. And if you listen to this show, you can stay ahead of the curve. So download the Kalshi app and use the code INDEPENDENT and get up to $500 in bonus credits when you trade 25, which is pretty good. Kalshi, 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 trade on anything. 18 and older, restrictions and eligibility requirements apply. Event contract trading involves risk and may not be suitable for all investors. Kalshi products are not available in all jurisdictions. Prices, values, and available markets may differ from those mentioned. For more information, see kalshi.com/regulatory. Independent Americans, now is the time. Check out Kalshi.
Right. So you're, as I mentioned earlier, you're recently retired, like me, with 9/11 related illnesses.
Yeah.
We have the 20th anniversary coming up, which I know kicks a lot of stuff up for me, and I'd imagine
Yeah.
you. Can you walk us through your 9/11? Were you working that day? Were you off?
Uh,
How'd you
I
get
was
there?
I was off. But I was working. Excuse me. I was living in Long Island City, where I lived there for a number of years, and my firehouse was in Woodside. It was a short drive, so I was laying in bed and reading a book, and my dad called me up. He's like, "Rich, you see the news?" And I turned on the TV, and it was all unfolding. It had just happened, the first plane. So I just jumped in my car immediately and drove to the firehouse. And then they did a full recall anyways, and they said everybody go to your firehouses, and so that was so again, I wasn't working on duty, but as soon as we got to the firehouse, everybody just started gathering all the tools. Rescue 4 had gone down there on the second alarm, or I think whatever alarm they gave it as soon as they realized it was an airplane. And all the guys were killed in Rescue 4, and so we just gathered all the tools that we could get out of the firehouse, everything that was still there, which of course there were plenty of tools, and somebody kind of flagged the bus, an MTA bus on Queens Boulevard, and the bus driver had all the passengers get off, and we just loaded all the tools onto there, and then everybody that showed up on at the firehouse got on the bus, and we went down, and so then we got to the West Side Highway, where they kind of held us for a little while they were trying to make sense of what was going on, and get riding lists together too, so they could keep track of that, because there were so many rumors, as you remember, there were so many rumors about who was alive, who was dead, who was missing,
Sure.
everything else. I mean, at one point they thought, if I remember right, they thought like 40,000 people had died, or something.
Yeah.
I mean, it was really, there was so much uncertainty going on. So once they got us so together, I had my group that I was with. There was one, two, three, four, five of us. I think it was, if I'm remembering right. I don't want to be forgetting anybody, because it's an important group, But
Sure.
and then the five of us, we stripped hose off of a engine that was parked there, and just folded up, and we had a length of hose on our shoulder, each of us. We had some hooks and stuff. We just grabbed a couple tools, and we didn't know what we were going to need. We just went walking in, and it was just and as I know you recall as well as I do, it was just like you went from the gorgeous blue sky into Armageddon. I mean, it was
Sure.
just like a blizzard, but it was all of course, ash and smoke and everything else.
And everything else.
Yeah.
Yeah. So after that day, we had to, if I remember correctly, they went directly to the AB chart, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
how often did you actually go down? Because I know it was a little
Uh,
weird.
so yeah, so for me, my experience was a little bit different, I think, than some people, or a lot of people's, because m- I was assigned to Engine 292. We had something like 12 guys on the roster, which is a really light roster.
Yeah.
So I did get sent down by the job a couple times, in that early time. But basically, what I did was we were on that. It was the ABC chart at first, and so I would do my 24, and then I would get off in the morning, and every morning Rescue 4 had a vehicle that was at their disposal. At one point, it was an ambulance and at one point it was just a big van or whatever. And whoever could get on would get on, and we would just go down, and just on our own time, not on the job's time. And so that's what I would do. I just made a regular schedule. I just When I would get off in the morning, I would get on the vehicle, whatever we had, and go down, and I'd spend the day, you know, with different groups. I mean, I wound up most of the time with guys from Rescue 4 in those early days, which gave me some, I guess, some pretty like interesting, if for lack of a better word, access, you know, yeah, so in the beginning I was there a lot, and then they kind of like put a stop to guys going in without having any, without being on duty.
Right.
And so at that point, I don't remember when that was, in like sometime in November or December or whenever it was. I really don't remember. I didn't go for a couple months after that, and then in March, they were looking for volunteers. Like every month, they were looking for volunteers for guys to go off the chart to go work the month at the trade center. So for me, March, I wound up going down and being the you know assigned there for the entire month of March. So
Right. That's crazy. I
yeah,
remember, I think that's when we started having all the firefighters from other places coming in, right, in those first couple months, which I
yeah,
think is
yeah, yeah,
so
and
that's
and also just about March also. So like a kind of a point about March is at that point it was down to the bedrock, but there was
right,
like the kind of like the sides were still sloped up with debris, especially if, as I recall, it was like the northwest corner still had a big hill of debris, and then they had previously been using the southeast corner as like a ramp for all the construction vehicles,
right,
and the ramp they just was just the debris, but and then they built that big steel ramp down, and then at that point we started digging up that corner, that southeast corner, and so there was a really a tremendous number of remains that were found in that month because of that, and
sure,
yeah.
you know. Rich wrote, a very moving piece about his experience at 9/11, which we'll put up a link to. But if we could just touch on a little bit of it, I know you were involved with finding at least one firefighter. Can you just walk us through that and tell us, what
Sure.
that experience was like?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, there was actually, multiple firefighters that, but the one I think you're probably talking about was, we were there one day. I don't remember which month it was, but it was still, it went from being called the pile to being called the pit.
Yeah,
And it was still like kind of the pile, but it was more almost like level at this point. And I guess. I mean, maybe it was still kind of the pile. It's hard to remember, but anyways, like we were there, in our group. We all had like rakes and things like that to sift through the debris. And there was, we were working side by side with a construction, like a grappler, that would go in and it would like pull up a big you know, scoop of debris and it would kind of lay it out, and then we would go like scraping through that. Then it would get scooped up and put in the back of a truck. And then that truck would get taken, that would get dumped and that would get searched again. Then it would get reloaded back onto the truck. Then it would go to the Staten Island landfill and it would get searched again there. And so there, it was really like everything was searched multiple times.
right.
So at this point, the grappler came up and I just remember one of the guys yelling. He's like, he's like pointing. He's like, stop, stop, stop. And we look at, or, whatever he was yelling, we look and you see two bunker boots hanging out of the bottom of this grappler. So like he had scooped up a fireman, without realizing. And it like, and I can clearly remember just, it was actually, now that I think about it. So it was definitely, early on, because, I'm going to interrupt myself just to say this one piece of the story because
Now you know what it's like.
Um, but at that point, like it was early enough that they hadn't really measured us for masks yet. Because you remember in the beginning, you just would grab whatever mask you could, and then at a certain point they measured you. Then you had a card, and you're like, you're I'm a large or whatever, and then
Right.
whatever it was, and then they would give you the proper mask, and then you would have the proper. But the mask that I had at that time was not the right size at all. So, and I don't know if you could tell, I'll turn sideways for you, but I got a big nose. So some people
Never noticed. I never noticed.
but so I'm wearing this mask and it's like crushing my nose and it's like and it's killing me the whole day as I'm working, and so anyways, back to the grappler now. So the grappler's got the thing now. These guys were absolute surgeons. Whether they were when they started, I don't know, but just doing all that work at the World Trade Center, but maybe that was just so much working at it that they just got so good. But whatever the case may be, he laid down the debris in such a way. I still have no idea how he did this because he had a thing full of debris, and he laid this fireman out perfectly, like no debris on him whatsoever. Debris all like wound up off to the side, and the guy was completely intact, except for the fact that the grappler had just, unfortunately ripped his like guts, his like stomach open or whatever. And he had, now it's like his innards were spilling out. It was really horrific, but that was again, it was like he had been preserved in the debris, which most people weren't,
Sure.
and then and so when he was laid out, like with all firemen or I assume like any first responder works that were in uniform, if we could find any kind of identification, that was like the first thing we did, so here we were searching this guy's body and couldn't find any kind of identification. He had a chain on his neck with it was like a Taurus, but I remember I was looking at it because I used to wear my badge, like a little gold badge, and stuff. And I was like, oh, maybe his badge number will be on there or whatever. I still to this day have no idea which firefighter this was,
Oh, wow.
but but, um but so anyways, and I was gagging, tr like, terrified that I was gonna throw up because the smell was because I had just these big gaps because I had this tiny little, you know
Right.
mask on this big face of mine or whatever, that's basically it. And then we kind of got him into a body bag and sent him to the morgue, and we moved on, just continued. The guy grappled another load, we raked through it, and just the day went on.
Yeah. Well, well, speaking of those gaps in your mask, we all know the controversy about the air
Yeah.
quality and being told it was safe to breathe and not to breathe. You actually were one of the guys who got sick early on, right? Before we went to Washington, before all these bills got passed,
Yeah.
you got sick and you were kind of left dangling by the
Yeah.
FDNY and
Yep.
and the national program. Uh, Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Okay. So that and as you know, like I hold bitterness about that.
Sure.
I love the job. I love the fire department. I love the FDNY, but I love the union. I love the membership, but I was mad at everybody, and I still am a little bit because what happened with me was I wound up. So I was at Deutsche Bank also. So just real quick, the Deutsche Bank fire for those people that are listening that probably most people know what it is, but maybe they don't. It was a building that was on the fringe of that was heavily damaged in the World Trade Center collapse. And at one point they were renovating it. It had like a huge chunk dug out of the middle of it. And at one point they were renovating it, and then they stopped and they said this is way too contaminated. And then they started doing a floor by floor abatement and then taking it down floor by floor. And then in 2007, in the summer of 2007, there was a fire there that wound up becoming a nightmare of a fire that where Joey Graffinino and Bob Badia both died, and stuff. And Squad 18 was there. I was one of the people working. We were basically stuck inside the building for a while, an hour and a half or whatever it was, while there was a record number of maydays, like something like 28 maydays given or something like that. Guys were lost all over the place. It's a whole nother story, the Deutsche Bank, for people that don't know it. I mean, it's worth reading up on and stuff. But anyways, after that, so I don't know whether it was that or 9/11, but in my mind, it was clearly one of those things that microscopic particles of whatever sort lodged inside my body. My body reacted by the antibodies got tricked basically into thinking that my platelets were foreign bodies. So now it's fast forward. It was months later, who knows how long this was going on, but months later, I went for my regular annual medical, and I had almost no platelet. I was like a hemophiliac. I don't know how I didn't spontaneously start bleeding because people have on average 150,000 to 400,000 platelets. That however the count works, but that's the number, And I was down to 19,000 platelets, I guess per whatever, in my blood, which they discovered at my medical. So from that point, they put me onto medical leave. I had to go once a week to a hematologist, and they wouldn't make it line of duty because it's an extremely rare condition, and it's what they call idiopathic, which means that it's impossible to trace the source. So it's a trigger disease, though. It's not like it's a genetic disease or something like that,
Right.
and extremely rare a male of my age at the time, which I was in my, somewhere in my 38, 37, whatever I was at the time. And so for a year, anyways, I spent the year on light duty going, again on my own time on a day off from my light duty schedule. I would go take the train, pay for train, to go into the city to see my hematologist. I'd have to pay for an extra day of daycare because I had a baby girl at home. Before I knew what it was, I'm like seeing my life flash in front of my eyes. I thought I had leukemia or something. I didn't know what was going on. They wound up going into my spine and like uh or into my excuse me into my, I don't know if it was my spine or my upper hip or whatever it was, but to dig marrow out and to test it. They tested my spleen. They did all kinds of stuff, and they determined it's like, yeah, it's this autoimmune disease that where you're it's called ITP, where your antibodies are killing your platelets. So anyway, I rode through it. I tried to fight it. I tried the union. I tried the union's lawyers. I tried everything I could, but nobody really wanted to take the case because it was an idiopathic disease. It's impossible to prove. I used to argue. I say, well, just as you say, it's impossible to prove that it was caused by my exposures. It's impossible to prove that it wasn't also. So I was really left hanging, and I didn't know. I thought my career was going to be over. Thankfully, because the the doctors were terrific, and through all the treatments that I got, and then ultimately I wound up on taking like these 4 pills every day for the side effect that it would boost um, platelet production. So I would like kind of be producing them faster than I could kill them. And then I would get weaned off of it. Then they'd start dropping again. Then I'd go back on the drugs. Then they'd wean me. And after like the fourth or fifth time being weaned off of this drug, my body just stopped killing the platelets. Thank God, and like and it hasn't come back. So it's something that has always been in my head. Like I'm always like wondering every time I get a blood test, am I going to have
Sure.
platelets? But it never did recur again. I knock on wood, but
Yeah. Well, and you must have had all those doubts whether or not your career was going to end.
oh,
And
without a
at
doubt,
that point, you would
I
have
was
been,
depressed,
yeah.
I,
And that wouldn't have been considered a line of duty, right? So you would have just
right.
been put on disability and
Yep. And not only that, but I was also I was not quite I didn't have 10 years on the job yet at that
right,
point. And 10 years is like a magic number because after that you collect a non-service disability pension. Whereas
right,
before, if I had been put out before 10 years, I just would be, that's it. No,
right,
not taking care of it all, so.
right.
But again, like I got lucky as far as it goes because it did go away and I did continue and do another, 12 years of my career or whatever it was, and I guess in the end I kind of look at it as all's well that ends well. I look at how terrible a lot of the ailments are that a lot of the guys that we worked with have gone through and even died, and stuff. And I say, well, I can't really complain because I mean, I never even felt sick. I just knew that I was, I mean,
Right.
if you remember, I even ran the marathon that year,
Yeah,
um,
I know. I mean, your story was always something that caused a fire in my belly. Yeah, I know that when I was down there, I definitely had your story in mind and Howie's, our colleague Howie, a senior man who had cancer before it was covered. And just to think that all that time you spent going down there on your own time, volunteering, after you were told it was safe to go down there, to thank you for your service would be to get a kick out the door.
right.
Um, you know,
Yeah.
what a slap in the face that would have been, but
Yeah.
thankfully you recovered. Um, we don't have too much time left and you have a lot of stories. I mean, your career is bookended by the greatest terrorist attack on our nation and the greatest pandemic our generation has seen. But in the middle there, you've pretty much seen it all. Um, I'd like to touch on something that I know happened, because I want people to realize that a firefighter is never off duty, right?
Yeah.
As you demonstrated. I mean, I think half the guys who died on 9/11 were off duty. Um, but tell us about the time you were on your way to work and you witnessed somebody getting run
Right.
over.
Yeah,
Um,
that was pretty terrible. So it's when you're at work, in the firehouse, you're in uniform and everything like that. You're expecting to go to who knows what, and nothing shocking. I mean, it is shocking, but it's not shocking because
Right.
you're there knowing that anything may happen that day.
Well,
Um,
after the way our career started, nothing is shocking, right?
yeah, exactly. And so the one day I was driving into work, and I was actually coming in early because I had to go to the Brazilian consulate for some reason, maybe to get a visa or something to go visit my wife's family. But I was coming over the Williamsburg Bridge into Manhattan, and as I got to the bottom, and now I get to the traffic light there, and I was like, I think I was like the third car. I was either the second or the third car, from the traffic light, and I watch a construction truck, turn onto Delancey Street, and I watched this guy, the 32-year-old, guy, not like a kid, but on a skateboard, and he grabbed onto the side of the truck, and like what do they call it, skitching or skeeching, whatever it's called.
Yeah.
I should have looked that up. If I know, I would have looked a lot cooler, whatever. But anyways, he grabbed the side of the truck, and I'm watching. I just in my head, I'm like, oh my god, this guy's crazy, And then I watched his skateboard kind of do this like wiggle, like he just caught a bad wheel or like he hit a pebble or whatever happened. But I see him and I'm like, my heart's in my chest, and sure enough, boom, he goes up and he goes down, and he goes right under the wheels of this truck. So I didn't see the wheels go over him because the car in front of me, but I jumped out of my car and I run over to look, and I see some people had come off of the sidewalk and were next to him. And I thought, it just looked like, oh, okay. I guess he didn't get run over. God, that was a close call. I jump back in my car, because I'm still in the middle of Delancey Street,
Right.
and I start to drive past, and I like look over, and I'm like, that guy's not moving, So like I pulled over, I run back. There was a wonderful woman that turns out was a retired EMT who was holding neck stabilization on him, and she turns out I got to know her a little bit afterwards. She's a very religious woman, and she was reading, not reading it, but speaking his last rites and stuff. And the guy, his eyes were open, but he was in full shock. He was, foaming at the mouth and everything. And I lifted his shirt to try to, and it was just a big growing purple bruise, like it was just, bleeding out internally, and it was horrible, really. Um, but so I basically, there was not a whole lot that we could really do, so like I got on my phone, and I know people had called 911. I called our dispatch, and I said, listen, we need to get this guy, needs a rush on the bus. He needs an ambulance immediately. He's got to get to a trauma surgeon if he's got any chance whatsoever. And of course, he was so severely damaged. I mean, he didn't survive. And he left behind like two young children. I actually got to know his parents and his sister a little bit. Like, they got in touch with me afterwards, and they wanted to meet me, which was touching but heartbreaking.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, so that's yeah, that's that story. It was pretty awful.
Yeah.
Um, he had just opened up ironically, he had just opened up a skateboard shop in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. But
Terrible. And then you had to go to work, right?
yeah,
Start
yeah.
your tour.
Yeah, and then I'm like, in my head, I'm like, this isn't supposed to bother me, so I'm like trying to act all cool, like, yeah, I just saw a guy get run over, but in my head, I'm just like, I was like, I was off that whole night.
Right. Speaking of which, I know you were on duty when the terrorists drove down the bike path, correct?
Yeah, yeah,
Can
that's yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
can you tell us a little about that? I know you guys pulled up on the scene pretty quickly.
yeah, so that one. So my favorite day to work was always the Gay Pride parade and the Halloween parade because
Sure. Yeah,
yeah,
me too.
yeah, totally. So our firehouse, for people that don't know where the Squad 18 is, it's like right in the root. It's like so it's like you are fully in the middle of it for both of those events, the Halloween and the Pride parade. And it's so much fun. I mean, there's such a good feeling in the air. Like, it's so much fun to work. We never stop running from this moment we get there till we get off, the following day. But
Right.
it's a lot of fun. So anyway, it was another Halloween. I was all geared up. I was psyched. I'm working Halloween. It was the afternoon, and we get the run. So for people that don't remember what the story was this guy he was like a lone wolf terrorist, like he was, I think he was like operating on his own, if I'm not mistaken. And he had gone and he had rented a pickup truck from like a Home Depot or a Lowe's or something. And what he wound up doing was he came and he just drove down the West Side Highway, veered up onto the bike path that runs alongside of it, and just like rode for like I'm not sure how far, pretty far though, like just like plowing over people on this bike path. And then he came out somewhere down in like in Lower Manhattan, and he rammed into a school bus full of kids. Thankfully nobody got hurt on the school bus. And then he got out. Now his truck was disabled. He got out, and I don't even know if he got. I don't think he got killed. He got shot in the stomach or something. Like I don't remember the end result of it, but I know that he was captured anyway. Whatever,
Right.
obviously at that point. So the 911 calls that were coming in were because this truck had driven into a school bus. Nobody had called about the bike path. Nobody knew about the bike path, you know. And so we were responding as a SOC unit going to a severe, like automobile accident. And um and as we're driving down the West Side Highway, we had Sheldon from Squad One was the detail that day. I remember him saying, he's like, "Man, there's a lot of people laid out on the bike path." Something to that effect. He said something like he was noticing that people were laid out. So we started looking, and as we like lean over to look out the window, there was a cop, like that, or somebody anyway. I didn't see because I was in the back, but somebody was out like waving, like trying to flag us down. So Adrian, who was the boss, like she had Brian, who was driving, had Brian pull over. We jumped out. We all grabbed like all the medical bags that we have on the rig. We had at that point we also had a mass casualty. I think we had that at that point. Anyways, we just grabbed all of our medical bags that we had, ran over, and right away we're just as soon as we got onto the bike path, there's three people laying there. One's got like like a big hole in their head. And stuff just leaking out. Obviously dead. Another one had like their leg broken so severely that the foot was pointed up toward their head, and it was just like it was horrific, and so we started trying to work on them. I'm looking around like there's people there, there's people there, there's people, we have six people, five because at that point Brian's on the rig just trying to raise dispatch and trying to give information, like trying to get more units sent to us, not just where they were all going. We're watching fire engines and ambulances zoom past us on the West Side Highway and trying to raise them on the radio, stuff like that. Eventually, Rescue One actually spotted us, and at a certain point, it was us and Rescue One. But for what seemed like an infinite amount of time, it was probably not that long, but it seemed like a incredible amount of time. It was just us, and something like 20 people laid out,
Oh wow.
Yeah, and so Adrian, she had run down, you know, like run north up the bike path, and she gets on the radio. She's like, "Richie, I need a tourniquet," So I grab my bag. These guys are working on these people here. I grab my bag and I'm running toward Adrian, and it's like the old thing that we would learn in like mass casualty incidents is the idea of triage. You have to it's a horrible thing to have to do, but you have to pick
Yeah.
and choose, So like
Yeah.
so like I see somebody sitting there just kind of like moaning and stuff like that, but seem like they're okay. That person can wait, and I see someone, that got thrown into the bushes, like I remember one person literally had their head backwards, because like had their neck broken so badly and and like and I ran up to Adrian, and there was this guy who was conscious, and he was laying there, and he was just like bleeding severely from his like upper leg, and so and his friend was with him who wasn't injured, and he was just like, it's completely distraught. These were I forget what they were from. They were from South America somewhere. It was like a high school reunion or something like that, but like a big group, like a big tourist group had come from like Argentina or so. I forget where they were from, but but the guy was he was at that point he was conscious, but he was not like coherent, but he was and I remember pulling out the tourniquet, ripping up his shirt, and like going to take his cut his pants off, and I see that he was thinking that he had like a big a wound on his leg, and I was going to try to get the tourniquet as high as I could, above I didn't get it above the wound so I could get him to stop the bleeding or whatever.
Right.
But he was ripped from his groin up, like all the way up across his belly, and like nothing to tourniquet. I mean, he was just
Yeah.
so what I did was the only thing I could think to do, I just like stuffed it with as much trauma dressings as I could. Then I just got I got oxygen on him right away, and
Right.
and he was kind of breathing on his own at that point, but he was fading, and then he wasn't really breathing on his own. So then I took that off and I started I was going to go put the bag valve mask, that you squeeze, like the bag valve mask onto him, and I remember trying to open his mouth, which I did to get a OPA in other words, to hold his tongue from blocking his airway, and I remember like pushing his lip, and it just like held my it just like my fingerprint, just like stayed indented in his lip because he had no profusion left. Like he had bled so much, and then Santos came to help. Richie Miranda from Rescue Wine, he was there like helping, and we're finally now the ambulances start arriving. So now we get the guy, we load him onto the ambulance with like two other victims and like three paramedics all stuffed on the back of this ambulance, and me and Santos get in the front, and I pulled up the GPS, and Santos was driving, and we just like sped to the hospital, got to the hospital. Beekman, and then but when they opened the door, they said, they had already declared him dead,
Oh,
and it hit me in the heart. It really, I mean, we're no strangers to losing, victims, but for some reason, this was one of those that just like it hit me like really hard. But I guess just like the overwhelming, I guess, tragedy of and like I don't know, man, just like what kind of sense does it make, just to cause that kind of death and damage for what? To prove what point? But
yeah.
it was a tough one.
So now, after this incident, did the job send anybody by the firehouse to talk to you guys, or
Yes, they did. At this point, the counseling unit is terrific on our job, and before 9/11, it was like a very small unit, and then 9/11 really created this wonderful support system in our counseling unit. And I, who, a friend of both of ours, Richie Portello, who's one of the greatest men I think that it's ever been on the job, retired as a chief, as me and you both know, but he at this point was now retired. He had been put out, he had tore his shoulder or something. And, after a long career, a long, very, very storied career, but anyway, he's been working with the counseling unit, so he came by and talked, and he's easy to talk to, because we're you know friends, at this point
right?
and stuff, and it was helpful. I remember I didn't take any time or anything. I just kept, but it definitely like my it took a little while for my head to snap back to being right, for sure.
If that ever happens, right?
Yeah.
Now, what about uh, now that I mentioned earlier you're retired, right? You moved
Yeah.
out to Colorado
Yeah.
recently. As we could see, you're still decorating.
Yeah.
Um, I
We got
found
boxes of
I found when I retired, once I stopped moving and just sat back and relaxed, that all these things, all those incidents started creeping back in my mind. Like you
yeah.
said, you got to kick them to the side when you're on duty, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes you can't. Sometimes things like that happen that eat away at you. Do you find any of these things coming back on you now? How are you feeling?
I mean, it's hard to say. I'm so distracted right now with with this move and with trying to get, my kids started school already, out here they're very cruel. They put the kids in school in like the middle of August, but so, but yeah, I mean, things do, you know, always, there's always, it's always easy for it to like just flunk, like stick itself back into my head, whatever it is. Sometimes it's funny stuff and sometimes it's horrible stuff, but this time of year, I mean, it always gets weird. And like you had mentioned it earlier, like about how, you know, and like every year from 9/11 on, it's always been this way. August is always a weird month because you don't
Yeah,
really realize it's happening, but it's starting to like really like worm its way into your mind. And then all of a sudden it's September 11th, and out of nowhere, like, like I'll be sitting in the car and all of a sudden I'm crying, and I'm like, where did that come
mhm.
from? But
Sure. Yeah, I've noticed that too. 'Cause, Kristen's father,
yeah,
was killed on 9/11. Um, and I've noticed the last few weeks that we're a little short with each other, and we both start slipping into, depression and anger without realizing it. Next thing you know, we're having an argument over nothing. And then I sat back and looked at my calendar and was like, oh,
Yeah.
it's that time of year again. And then we obviously talked about it. Um, but I hope you're talking to people because I'm a big advocate for mental health, especially with physical conditions. We've linked Dr. Moline at Mount Sinai has linked PTSD with the acceleration of the 9/11 illnesses,
Mm.
as you probably know. But the great thing is, even out in Colorado, you can get it. You can still visit World Trade Center doctors, right? I mean, the program's everywhere. So for the people listening out there, uh, as Rich alluded to earlier, we had volunteers showing up at the World Trade Center for months, right? From all
Yeah.
over the country, all 50 states. So if you're in any of those states, you can go visit a doctor and at least get your yearly medical done. So that's the beauty of the program that we got set up. But as Rich said, sometimes there's things you can't kick to the side, right? So you got to talk about it. You can't let it eat away at you because that's when your body starts eating away at itself. That's what I think. I don't know.
Yeah, when you're in the firehouse, people would ask, like, how do you deal with it and stuff like that? I said, well, you're in the firehouse, and it's like without even realizing it, you're in therapy all the time because we're
Yeah.
all sitting around together at the kitchen. The kitchen is where all the world problems are solved, right? And like all our personal problems and world problems, as well as creating brand new ones all the time for each other. When we break each other's chops. But but it's something like you can always talk about the stuff there. So like and joke. There's a lot of gallows humor that comes with the
Hmm.
fire department.
Yeah.
um, there's like the one. It's kind of horrible and funny at the same time. But like that, I remember we had a run and a guy had jumped off of a roof and landed in this courtyard, and he was like, it was like the most strange thing ever. But the way he had landed, it was like he was like half buried in the mulch and like and it was like perfect. It was done on purpose, like
Right.
and and I and anyway we deal with it. The guy was clearly dead, and we get back on the rig, and I remember one of the guys who I guess I won't say his name, but one of the guys saying, talk about taking a dirt nap. It's like that's just like the typical fire department gallows humor. But
Right, but I always felt without those jokes, it'd be tough to get through it, right? I mean,
100%, 100.
it's
You
dark
got
humor,
you
and
know
you don't really understand it unless you're living through it,
yeah. You
But
got to be able to make yourself laugh. I mean, you just otherwise you'll go crazy.
yeah, and that was one of my favorite things about working with you is you seem to deal with these things the same way I do, with positivity and jokes.
Yeah.
Um, so I always appreciated that. So speaking of positivity, I know you're a poet. You're an amateur guitar player.
At best.
At best. I was wondering if you had anything, you'd like to share with the people out there who might
Um,
not know the Nav,
it's funny because I do play guitar and I love to write songs, and I'm very like shy about it, and yet
right?
I make these little videos and like I put them out for the world to see, the world on
Right.
Facebook or whatever, so that then I'm just like, screw it, if they want to like point their finger and laugh, let them, but yeah, I mean I could try. I mean I don't really have my big problem is I'm very bad with memorization, but I can give it a shot. So if you'll have to forgive me if I mess up some words, but I'll pull out
Alright,
because you gave me
alright.
a little warning that you were going to ask me this. So I got my guitar by my side. Let's see. Let me see if I can get it in the screen a little better here.
Alright.
All right. So I was thinking about it. What are the closest songs that I have to being memorized? And I got like a love song, because I'll do a little love song for you. This one's called "That's Okay," and I may have to do we may have to say cut and do another take because I'm sure I'll mess it up. Here we go. Well, I ain't got a lie, but I got my girl and the children that she gave me. They are my world. If I get nothing else, that's okay. There couldn't be anything better than today. Well, we both go to work and come home again. Every time that I see her, I hold her hand. Maybe we got debt. That's okay. There couldn't be anything better than today. Well, we haven't stopped loving since the day we wed. Standing nervous in the courthouse, then running home to bed. If we ever get old, that's okay. There couldn't be anything better than today. Well, I ain't got a lot, but I got my girl and the children that she gave me. They are my world. If I get nothing else, that's okay. There couldn't be anything better than today. There couldn't be anything better than today. There you go.
Well, that was great, buddy. I can't think of a better note to end my very first episode on.
Thanks a lot, man.
Well, I hope you will join me again and tell some more of your stories
I would love to.
uh,
Love to.
and share your positivity mission with the world. You can find Rich's songs on YouTube, right? What's your YouTube channel?
Uh, either my name, Richard Naviasky, or the one Nav, like THE1, the number,
There's
NAV.
one's all we need.
So that's it, the one, but the one, not the word, the number, NAV,
All right.
and that should find it. And also, if you want to look at my little pictures that I put in my kids' lunches all the time, go to Instagram and look up lunch bag treasures.
Yeah,
All
yeah.
four.
You got one for us?
Yeah, I got this was yesterday's, but it just happens to be one of my favorites. Let me see if
All
I
right.
can pop up on the screen here. Is that clear?
The riddle of the stinks. What smells? And we got a little sphinx-looking character there. Oh, he looks like he's tooting.
I mean, tell me that's not hilarious. Come on.
That is that's very Nav. So anyway, man, thank you for being my first guest.
My pleasure.
Thank you for your service to our city and our country.
Thank you.
I know
You
it
too.
probably makes you uncomfortable, but you are a hero and you earned
Thank
every
you.
minute of your retirement. I hope you're enjoying it with that.
I am. Thank you. And Rob, I feel the exact same way about you. What you've done has been absolutely tremendous. You've done more than so many people to get bills passed and everything else. The time that you spent on the job and the time that you spent after it have been tremendous.
All right, man. Well, thanks, bro. And hopefully you get through 9/11 this year unscathed, and we'll share a beer together soon.
Sounds great. I look forward.
All right, brother. Be well.
You too. Take care, Rob.
Archipelago, he tells me the left and right are dreams for those without a clue. And when you wake, it's time to grow. And it's not cool to believe in school, but if I can say one thing, I've seen the children of the revolution and the good trouble they can bring. He says the red and blue are dead and independent is an attitude. An island in the sea of rhetoric and archipelago, he tells me the left and right are dreams for those without a clue. And when you wait, it's time to grow.
Powered by Righteous Media.